Hi there, esteemed audience, and welcome to another episode of Middle Grade Ninja. I'm your host, Rob Kent, and as you know, I'm the author of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, and you can get that novel now as a paperback, as an audiobook, but the ebook, oh, esteemed audience, the ebook is free, yes, free, to download whenever you're watching or listening to this, wherever fine ebooks are sold. Get your copy of book one, and then when you're hooked on Banneker Bones and Ellicott Skullworth's adventures fighting robot bees on their jetpacks, and you want to know what other kind of sci-fi mischief they're going to get up to, good news, I've got Banneker Bones and the Alligator People just waiting for you, to be followed by Banneker Bones and the Cyborg Conspiracy, and probably eventually some more stories. So keep an eye out for that. Under the super secret pen name Robert Kent, I've written some novels for older readers. You can find out more about that, and more importantly, you can get the entire back catalog of this show and read written interviews with literary agents, editors, authors, book people, the world's best people, and all of that is waiting for you at middlegradeninja.com. For today, I couldn't be more excited. We have the extremely good fortune to be chatting with Kereen Getten. Kereen, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to chat with you. I've got all kinds of questions for you, but esteemed audience knows that I never make my guests suffer through me trying to go over their background or trying to summarize their book. Why would I make you sit through either of those things when you're right here and could tell us better than I can? So if you would give esteemed audience an overview of your background, and we'll get started.
Yes, of course. So my name is Kereen Getten. I'm the author of If You Read This and When Life Gives You Mangoes. I was born in Jamaica and moved to England when I was 7 years old. I lived in the south of England, very small town. My father was a headmaster, so we moved around quite often. So we moved across the country. We moved to the north of England and stayed there for a while, and then we moved back to Jamaica for a few years. Then we came back to England, and so we traveled quite a lot because my dad was also a preacher, so we did a lot of missionary work. So we traveled to a lot of Caribbean islands in between that as well. And I was always into reading. As soon as I could choose my own books at maybe 8 years old, I was hooked on reading. I would get a book. I would sit in the corner of a room where I wouldn't be disturbed, or between two bookshelves where no one could find me. And I would just read for as long as adults would allow me to read. And a lot of the books that I would choose would be from my grandma, because she also lived in a house with us, and she had a lot of like Enid Blyton books. And so I'd read a lot of Faraway Tree, Famous Five, Secret Seven, and that's what really got me into writing.
When you say headmaster, I'm here in the United States, as are some of the listeners, but not all. Oh, God bless you, international listeners. But when you say headmaster, I of course think Dumbledore. What is that? Is that like a principal? What does that?
Principal. That's the word. So sometimes I know straight away that there's a different word that they say in America, and I'll change it in my head. But then, I don't always remember that you don't call your principals headmaster. So we call them headmaster or headmistress. You guys call them principals.
Gotcha. So he's got an office there in the front of the school. If you get in trouble, that's who you're going to see.
That's the one. Where they call your parent.
If you need the rejuvenative powers of Fox the Phoenix, well, that's as well. So I've heard you talk about this elsewhere. That's a big change, going from a small insulated community, relatively within Jamaica, like described in your books, and then you can move to a town in England where you are the only people of color in town, right?
Yes, exactly. So where I was born in Jamaica was a small fishing town, and we lived above the town. On this hill in an even smaller community, and that's all I knew. Everybody knew each other, and that's where I get a lot of my inspiration for my books from. So then we moved to England, and there was so many things to adjust to. The weather, for one, it was freezing cold when we arrived. I'd never experienced that. It was snowing. I couldn't understand why ice was on the floor and not in the fridge. But also we were the only people of color, yes. And that was my first experience of racism, and that when you don't look like other people, they don't always accept that. And that was a really confusing time for me.
Well, I've heard you talk elsewhere about people actually stopping in the street and pointing at you and your family.
Oh yes, we had so many instances. We would walk into town, or we would just visit a neighboring town, and people would literally stop in the street and just stare at us in silence. They'd be having a conversation, the conversation would stop, we'd walk into a restaurant, the chatter would stop, and everyone would just stare at us. I remember a time when we went on a boat. There was this boat trip that we're going on the lake, and we were waiting in the line to go on the boat, and everybody on the boat was just staring at us. And this little girl, bless her, went, "Mummy, there's some dark ones coming on." And then we had to get on this boat. Now this little girl had announced it to everybody, and walk through this crowd of people who just stared at us. Yeah, it was very eye-opening and confusing time for me, because I didn't understand what the problem was. You know, I was who I was, and I'd never been told that I was different. I'd never experienced being different. So that was quite eye-opening for a child as well.
I chuckle a little bit there, just one in recognition of unfortunately having had not that experience, obviously, but somewhat similar experiences, having been from an all-white town and then marrying an African American woman, and then coming back and meeting some of those same people, like, oh, you're not who I thought you were. We were in a situation before, and now I see you. I know who you are now. And you chuckle a little bit, because it's just so relentlessly terrible. What other reaction can you have unless you want to break down and weep or rage every time you think of it, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I remember how I felt at the time as a child. I remember not wanting to get on that boat and feeling a little bit terrified that these people didn't seem to like me. That's how I felt at the time. And it was probably one of the worst trips I ever had. But when I tell a story as an adult, you know, I laugh when I tell it, because it is just so ridiculous. You know, when you look back on it as an adult, you just, you can't understand how or why people think or behave that way. And it's so crazy. It's almost humorous. That it's almost like out of those you know, those comedy films where someone just screams something in a crowd and everybody turns to look, and it was those instances. And maybe sometimes that's a coping mechanism, you know, to laugh about it. Like you said, instead of crying, you just sort of, you have to laugh and not let it affect you too deeply, or else, you know, you would just carry that forever.
Reminds me of John Smith and A Stranger in a Strange Land. Great book by Robert Heinlein. If you only read one Robert Heinlein book, and by God, given some of the ones he wrote, maybe that's probably not a bad policy. But Stranger in a Strange Land is a quality book, and he comes from Mars, and his observation of humanity is, oh, you laugh because it hurts so much. And when I read that, it cut so deep. But yes, that is what a Martian would take away from humanity here on Earth. That's how we're rolling.
Yeah,
I bring up all of this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just said that's perfect. That's a perfect quote.
It's one of my favorites. So if you haven't read it, esteemed audience, it's highly recommended. After, of course, you've read all of Kereen's books and my books, get your copy of If You Can Read This, available now. Read that. But then when you get done, check out Heinlein. But I bring up all of that because I know that community is very much a focus, certainly in If You Can Read This, as well as was it where
When Life Gives You Mangoes.
Thank you. I was going to fumble it. When Life Gives You Mangoes. So I know that that's a big focus to, and I wonder how much that experience, that those two extremes of having a community and people all around you that are like you, that accept you, support you, help to raise you, and then going from that extreme to the other, how much that plays a role in shaping your interest in community.
Oh, hugely, I think. I know that when I was in Jamaica in that small community, I didn't really appreciate it until I left that community and didn't feel that and didn't have that anymore. I took that very much for granted that I could go down the hill to my cousin and walk into their house and watch TV with them, or go down the road and play games with the neighbor across the road. Um, that were all things that I took advantage, didn't take, gosh, my brain's just gone, didn't appreciate until I left. And I think like when I moved to England, I really sort of just expected that to continue, that, you know, I came over as a child. I thought that was normal. I thought that's what every community was like. And when I didn't experience that, I think I yearned for my home community even more. And I think that's why that reflects so much in my story. I think sometimes you don't appreciate where you are until it's gone, and then you almost idolize it as this perfect setting. We have this thing of sort of just remembering the good things of the past, you know, and there were negative things, of course, that happened in that community. But I think what I took away from it was that, you know, people were there for you and sorry, and supported you all the time. And I don't think I've experienced that since.
Have you been able to, I'm assuming now that you're an adult and you choose where you want to live and where you go, as much as any of us are able to choose those things, have you been able to cultivate a community around you?
I think I've managed to, more so in the writing community. And I think that's been hugely helpful to do that. When I first started out writing, I was writing for years on my own. I was very isolated. I wasn't really aware of the writing community. I sort of just wanted to write. I loved writing and I just did it. And it wasn't until I went onto social media and started connecting with other writers and people who were going through the same thing. And, you know, they were having the same issues with coming up with ideas and editing and finding an agent and a publisher. And that was hugely helpful for me. I think like outside of the writing community, I've sort of accepted that I'm not going to find that sort of community again. Like I go back home regularly, and even that's changed now. People have moved on, they've left, they've grown up, they've married, and that community is not the same as it was when I was a child.
Wouldn't it be nice if you went back and it was like an episode of Cheers and everyone just turns and yells, Kereen?
I know. We've been waiting here for you this whole time.
Yeah, I know that you have wanted to be a writer since age 8. Do I have that right?
Yes. Yeah. Hey, yeah, and 8 years old was probably around the time I started choosing what I read. And I started reading books that my grandma had. She had like a huge collection of books, and there was a lot of Enid Blyton books. And I just remember when I started reading those books, just being so in awe that someone could take you to a completely different world. And it was believable, and it was exciting, and it was thrilling, and, you know, you wanted to be in that world. And I remember around that time thinking, you know, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to do this. I want to be able to create worlds. And I started writing very, very badly, short stories, and forcing my family to read it. They were so patient with me.
Well, there's another upside of having community, is finding people who love you enough to read your terrible first drafts.
Yes. Yeah. And that was my family. Every single time they would read, well, they said they read it, and I believed them.
But you know what? Even if it's not 100% true, the effort to lie still implies love. So
exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So I know that as you're writing as a child growing up, anybody who listens to this show knows that we've had a whole movement for we need diverse books, because books weren't diverse. This is not breaking news, obviously. So how does that impact you, knowing that you're looking around publishing and you're not seeing books that feature characters who look like you or your family? You're not seeing people working in publishing who might have that in common with. How does that impact your view of publishing? And how do you anticipate that it may be changing for the next future author who can look and see your books available?
I mean, it made a huge impact on me, because I didn't think my stories would be accepted, because my characters didn't look like the characters that were out there. And so I accepted for a very long time that I would just be writing for myself, because I didn't see people like me. I didn't read books about people like me. So clearly those books, publishing didn't want those books. So I quite happily read books with people that didn't look like me, and I enjoyed those stories. But I didn't think that my stories would be accepted in that world for a very, very long time. And then when I started to see a few books with characters that looked like me, it was that moment. That's when I decided I would give it a go. I was like, oh, okay, so we're buying books with people that look like me. Now's my opportunity. Let me try, because if I don't try, then I will just regret it. And that's when I started putting my work out.
I know that I had read that you had a career teacher told you that writing wasn't a career and you should rethink your options.
Yes, or career teachers. Yeah, so I don't know if you have this in the US, but in the last couple of years of school, you have a career teacher and you have meetings with them, and they sort of just find out what you want to do in the future and sort of help guide you on where to go next, or where to, what subjects to take in college and stuff. And so my meeting with my career teacher, she said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a writer. And she says, that's not a career. Choose another one. Choose a real career. And I just remember my heart sinking, and that sort of oh my gosh, I can't even speak. I hate using big words. That sort of just the thought that I had before, that there were no books with people that looked like me. And then my career teacher telling me that, that wasn't a career for me. And I thought, okay, so that's true then. This is not for me. So I went into admin. I became an administrator, and I worked for charities. I worked for children's charities for a really long time, and just continued writing for myself.
Gotcha. So you're writing that whole time. She discourages you from the idea that this is going to be a career, but like, well, you can't stop me just from enjoying this thing I love.
No, I couldn't stop writing. I wanted to write. It was my love. And I think, that's such an important message, to do what you love. And the way you know that it's something that you love is, could you do it if it wasn't a career? Would you continue doing it anyway? And my answer is always yes. That's what I did for years. Every spare moment I had, I wrote. I'd come home from my normal job and I would write, because I loved writing. I loved how it felt to put these stories down on a page and create these worlds. And that was what I enjoyed. It was good enough for me. So, I just continued doing it.
I maintain that there is no book that I have written that is better in my own mind than my first book, because there was so much I didn't know about how terrible it was that, of course, it was brilliant. My God, I wrote a book. And then, of course, eventually I got critique partners and was exposed to people with experience who told me, well, it's good that you're writing, but let's talk about how to maybe do this a little bit better. And then I thought, well, I've done it better now. I'm like, no, there's still so far to go. Now that you've published 3 novels, with another on the way here in January that we'll be sure to talk about before we're done. Now that you're in publishing, you are an author, and you've had, I'm assuming, some experiences along the way that even though your 4th book is perfect, somebody still told you to make some changes somewhere in there. How does that temper your excitement and your love of just creating the story, or does it?
It sort of does. And I've said this a few times, in that I love writing a story, but I hate editing, because editing is when you really have to think about, does this story work? And you have to take out things that you might actually love, but doesn't make any sense to the story. And I think like before I had all that information and I just wrote what I loved, and there was no outside critique. It was just me just writing and just enjoying that journey. But as soon as I got a publishing deal and started working with editors, and learning about structure and what worked, and just, that saying about killing your darlings, like taking out the things that you personally love but doesn't work for the story. I think that, that sort of takes away the excitement for me. And especially the way I write as well, because before I used to just sit down and just write off the top of my head, and I did that with Mangoes. I sat down and I just wrote straight off the top of my head. But when I had a publishing deal, I learned that that couldn't work when you're working with somebody else. They sort of need to know where the story's going. And that sort of took away the excitement for me as well, because I needed to think about the story and where it was going and how it ended before I started it. But it's also a good experience for me. I find that method works better for me to sort of do the outline and a synopsis and sort of figure out, at least have a vague outline of where the story is going. That works better for me, even though I'm not like, oh, I'm so excited about writing this story. Now it's a lot more, tame, but it's better for me in the long run, she says.
Well, I mean, why is it important to make that change when you know somebody else is going to be involved to start? I'm assuming, do you write like a formal outline? How involved are you getting in planning before you'll start a project?
So if I'm working with a publisher, I write a basic synopsis, probably like a page, and just do like an outline, maybe like a paragraph or two of each chapter, of how it starts, what's happening in the middle, and sort of a vague idea of how it ends. I've been quite lucky in that I've worked with editors that have sort of given me the room to change that ending, because it does sometimes, sometimes you think this is how it's going to end when you write an outline, but then when you start writing it, it just takes you in a slightly different direction. And I've been lucky to have editors that have sort of allowed me that space to do it. So yeah, when I just do like a basic, like couple of paragraphs for each chapter, every few chapters, just so they just know how it begins, what's happening in the middle, what's the journey, and how it ends, basically.
And I'm going to ask this question a little bit facetiously because I have some idea. It happens to me, unfortunately, where my characters will ignore my outline, just blatantly disregard all of my careful planning and say, no, we're doing this instead. And, all right, well, I guess you are. Why do you think that happens? Why do you think that it changes from the plan at the beginning?
I think, well, for me, when I write an outline, I'm sort of writing it for someone else. And I'm in my head, I'm thinking about where this story is going, and I write down in that moment where I think the story is going. But when you start to actually write and sort of create this journey, sometimes maybe you do a scene and an idea comes to you and your character is like, no, I'm not going to go straight on. I'm going to veer left and I'm going to go up that hill. And you're thinking, shall I continue straight on because that's where I said I was going to go, or shall I follow this journey up the hill? And I always find that it's better to just go with the character and where the character wants to go, and you have the better ending that way, for me anyway. I know that with Mangoes, when I first wrote it, it's got a completely different ending to what it has now. When I wrote it, it was just a normal ending of the kids, playing and running up the street. And as I went back to edit it, as they were going up the street, this idea came to me of this house on the hill that was haunted. And I went, oh, but I've written the story already. Shall I go with it? And I just thought, let me just go with it and see what happens. So I completely rewrote the whole story and went with this idea. And I think it's the best thing that I did. I think you've just got to follow your heart when you're writing.
It's still a tremendous leap of faith, though, when you already have the outline, the plan, and somebody said, "I like what you already had. Why are you doing this?" And you have to explain, "No, not me, not me. I want what you want. The character wants this."
Yeah, take the blame off yourself. It's not me, it's the character. I wanted to do exactly what you wanted, but the character said no. I think, yeah, it's so easy, isn't it, to just stay on track. But I think also at the end of the day, you have to love what you write. So if you stay on track, but in your head, you're not happy with it and you're thinking of doing something completely different, I think it's your story. And at the end of the day, you need to be happy with what you write. And even though you tell people this is the direction it's going in, and it changes, then you should just go with that, because it's your story and you need to be happy with it at the end of the day. I just believe that.
Well, in theory, I believe this is true, although I'm open to the idea that maybe it isn't. That happens to me enough times in life that I just accept that sooner or later, many of my things that I believe now will be challenged, and I'll think, oh, well, now I believe something better. But I do believe that if you love your story, if you're happy with it, esteemed reader who eventually gets their hands on it will be happier with the result. I think we can tell when people are checked out or are not interested in their book.
Yeah, 100%. I absolutely believe that as well. I think that you can tell when someone is not 100% into the story that they write. You can feel it. I think it's the same with any sort of art. If you watch an actor acting, and if you go to a show and you see a singer on stage, you can tell when people are not 100% into it, and you feel that and you take that on, and you're turned off by it. The whole idea of writing is that you bring people into this world, and you have to bring them in fully. So you have to be fully committed to that world in order for them to believe that's real.
So I know you had some success when you'd written short stories for a while, but then you write your first novel in 2012, and then you write 3 more novels over the next 3 years, and then you switch to short stories. What precipitated that change?
So when I first decided that I was going to send my work out to agents and publishers, I started writing adult books. And I was still very green. I still didn't know what I was doing. I was just writing what I loved, and whatever came in my head, I wrote down on a paper and I sent it off. And it wasn't going anywhere. I'd get nice little polite letters going, thank you, but no thank you. So I thought, okay, let me just put that to one side. That's not working at the moment. And let me just write short stories, which I did a lot when I was a child. They're a lot quicker. And what I will do is I'll just write short stories and I'll just put it up on forums or social media, and I'll just see what feedback I get from that. And so that's what I started to do. I started to write short stories. I used to put them on forums. On my Instagram, I used to write short stories and put them on there. And then I saw a competition on Twitter asking people to put out their stories. You had to do like I don't know how many, I think it's 240 characters in a tweet or something like that. And you sort of had to pitch your work. And those agents and publishers would be looking, and if they liked it, they would like your tweet, and that would mean you'd send them your work. So that's what I did. I pitched a story that I'd started, which was originally Mangoes. It was just one chapter, and I didn't know where it was going. And I pitched that, and they liked it. I sent that off. And my agent, I had a meeting with my agent, and she agreed to sign me, basically. But yeah, so I started off doing short stories because writing for adults wasn't working for me, and I just wanted to take a break. I wanted to continue writing, but I just wanted to take a break from that and sort of reassess which direction I was going to go.
See, I can always almost hear a portion of the audience who's in the submission, who's in the query minds at the moment, who's screaming, "Wait, go back! How did you just get an agent? That's the dream I want for myself." So you're tweeting, and this agent likes your tweet, and then you set a meeting in person, or what's the next step?
Yeah, so it was called a Div Pit, I think, on Twitter, and so when they like your pitch, they usually tell you how to send your work off, and sometimes it's like one chapter plus a synopsis, or maybe 3 chapters plus a synopsis. Different agents ask for different things. I think my agent asked for 3 chapters plus a synopsis, which I did. I sent that off to her, the email that she'd said to send the work to. So I sent that off to her. And I didn't hear anything for a while. Then she got back to me and said, "I love the 3 chapters. Can you send me the rest of the work? What else you've got?" So I sent that to her, and she was quite quick, actually. I think maybe a week or 2 weeks later, she said, "Can we arrange to have a meeting?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness." I was so excited. And it's really funny because I remember that she wanted me to meet in London because that's where her office was, and I didn't have any money to go to London. I just remember thinking, how am I going to get to London? I'm going to have to find a way. I don't even think I've actually told her this story. I'm going to have to find a way to get to London. And I remember dipping into my rent money to buy my ticket to go to London, and I couldn't afford to buy lunch or breakfast. So I was starving. I was so hungry. I went into the meeting. I hadn't had breakfast. I hadn't had lunch. And I was so nervous. I didn't know what to say to her. And I thought I'd completely blown the meeting because I was just so nervous. And then I think it was a week later, maybe week and a half later, she sent me an email and saying, it was a lovely meeting and I would like to represent you if you are on board. And I was like, yes, please.
Thank God. How are you feeling on the train back? You think that you've blown it, and you've also dipped into your rent money, and you're hungry.
Yeah. I remember at the time I was so overwhelmed with hunger that I couldn't think much of the actual meeting. I just needed to eat. And then when I came home and I ate, I remember it started to sink in, and I just felt just a little bit sick to my stomach because I thought I'd completely blown it. I was like, oh, no, there is no way she's going to sign me, because I was a nervous wreck. I didn't ask any questions. I was mumbling. I don't know what I was talking about. There is no way. And I got quite a little bit mad with myself that I'd blown such a huge moment. So I wasn't expecting her to say yes.
And so when she does, is that like winning every lottery there ever was? What's that experience?
It was when I got the email, I remember just squealing, jumping to my feet, and then texting everybody I know. Before I even answered her, I think I just was like, oh my gosh, guess what just happened? Yeah, I was so elated and in disbelief as well. And I think that pretty much describes my entire writing journeys, as I'm always in complete disbelief of where I am and how I got here. I always think people are just going to find out that I'm a complete fraud and I'm not meant to be here. Like, how did you get here? You're terrible. But yeah, I was just so excited, and I couldn't believe it was actually happening. I felt that way for a really long time. Even after I signed the contract, I still couldn't believe it.
What would happen if if an agent saw that you'd accepted their offer on Twitter before you got to them?
I know.
She seems very
okay, that's a yes then.
She's updated her social media bio. Hang on.
Already changed my bio before I emailed her.
Like right before the second date, changing your status to in a relationship. Hang on now.
Are we?
We might have been, but not now. Goodbye.
So you've blown that.
So she signed you. Life's looking good, but then you still have to go through the submission process. These jokers at publishing houses still have to weigh in. Why? The agent already said it's good. Just publish it. Don't worry about it. So how long does that submission process take then?
Well, it was a bit longer for me. So she signed me and I hadn't finished Mangoes at the time because I'd only written one chapter. And I remember I went away on holiday and I just had this great idea of this fantasy YA book that I decided to write. I'd pitched it to her, I think. I can't remember how that story goes, but I wrote this story on holiday. I came back and she sent that out. We worked on it for a while, and then she sent it out and we didn't get anything back. No interest at all. And I remember just feeling completely gutted and thinking that was my one chance and I'm not going to get another one. And is this over? Just completely questioning, is this over? Because I didn't have anything else to pitch. And I went away and felt really sorry for myself for a while, for a really long time. And then I dusted myself off and thought, I'm always writing stories. I have lots of ideas. I have lots of short stories. Let me go into my documents, see what I've got, and see if there's something there that I can work on. And that's when I found that Mangoes chapter, which was called something else at the time. And I remember rereading it and thinking, let me see if I can do something with this. And I sat down and I started writing and I finished writing and editing it in a month and sent it to my editor. She sent me an email that I sent it to on a Friday evening, and the Friday night she sent me an email saying, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm putting it out as soon as I can. And the following week, she did a little bit of editing with it. Then she sent it out. And I think a week later, we started to get offers.
And so now you're about to be 4 books out in the world here come January. You're on the Middle Grade Ninja podcast. My God, you've made it.
I know, right?
Do you feel that you are definitely an author? You can take some of that worry off that this won't happen? Or is there still that sense of panic that, one, that we're all going to find out you're a fraud, of course, but 2, that this is all going to go away? Is that a concern, or have you found confidence that, no, I'm here to stay?
No, it's constant. It's always constant for me, because for me, it's never guaranteed, I had a 2-book contract. That 2-book came to an end. And then I was panicking what was going to happen next. But luckily, my British editor asked me, do you have something else? And I had an idea in my head and she accepted it on that idea, which I've just finished the 3 books for that. But you're constantly thinking the contract's going to come to an end at some point. Then what? It's not like it's a forever contract where I'm always going to be guaranteed work. And I never have that confidence where I think, I've brought out a few books now, it should be okay, because it's not really, there's no guarantee at all. I could bring out 6 books and I think by end of next year, it probably will be 6 books I've brought out. And I'll still be worrying about then what, what if, then they've had enough and it's, the next book idea I have, they're not happy, they don't like it and say no. And that's a constant worry for me. At the moment, I'm having a little bit of a break after I've just finished 3 books, but I'm still constantly thinking of ideas. I'm still working on ideas so that when I've come off this break, I can pitch that to my agent and then we can send that out and see what happens. Because I never relax at all. I never think this is it, I'm here.
Well, that sounds sounds stressful. On the other hand, you can't argue with the results. The books are getting done. So if that motivates you, I don't know that this pain is useful to you, but it does seem to be mostly working out.
Yeah, it's not useful at all. It's a terrible place to be. Like, who wants to be stressed constantly? Nobody at all. I think that's just part of my personality. I'm always I never think everything's guaranteed. I always feel like I have to constantly be working to stay where I'm at. And I don't think I've ever fully accepted that this is where I'm at. I'm an author now. In my head, I'm always, Kereen trying to write books and hope that somebody will like it.
You're still back in that counselor's office, career. What do you
Yes. Yeah.
Telling you, nope, it's not going to happen. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just pop out as soon as your publishing contracts dry up and say, I told you.
Yes, exactly. And it's so strange, the things that we hang on to, because my English teacher told me if I do anything with my life, do something with my writing. But that doesn't stick out as strong. I still remember that because I put it in my book in the acknowledgements. But it's sometimes we hang on to the negatives a lot more than we do the positive. And I know for me, a lot of the times, like, I'm constantly thinking of, what if this doesn't work out? What if the next book doesn't work out? What if no one likes it? What if it doesn't work? Instead of thinking, I'm on your podcast. This is a great place to be. Enjoy it. I don't think and I don't know if a lot, how many other authors are like that. I kind of guess probably they are the same, that, you just constantly just thinking, how do I stay here? How do I make sure that I continue this dream that I have?
Something that's a comfort to me and may not be a comfort to you, but I'll share it anyway in hopes that it is, or if not, somebody will hear it and well, that's a comfort to me anyway, which will be good. But I do think that the pandemic has had us all reevaluating what matters, what's important to us with the time that we have here. And sometimes I think, is some of this time I've spent writing, I don't regret any of it, but could I maybe start to investigate some other creative outlets as well? And would that make me not an author? And it wouldn't. I publish things. They're available. Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees, esteemed audience. Get your free copy. I will always be an author. You can't. You can say I'm not a good author, but you can't say I'm not one. I am. There's a book. There are books available. And so that calms me down a little bit. I'm very proud of what I've put out in the world and grateful for the opportunity to have been able to do that. And so whatever comes going forward, I'm still happy to have had that. And it calms me a little bit. I don't know if that will work for you, or if no, don't you dare calm me down. I need that fear to write more books.
No, that's a really good. Yeah, I do need to think that way. I have books out, they are published. I am an author. I don't know. I guess I don't know if it's a British thing or what it is. It almost feels like I'm being arrogant, but I'm not. I actually have books out, right? I'm not boasting to say I'm an author. I actually do have books out. It's weird how my brain works. I'm not sure.
I've had enough people that I've bragged to, just regular people who aren't in the writing community. Like, I will never forget, a slight humble brag. I got a blurb from Richard Adams, which was just the biggest thing that could ever happen at the time. And I ran into work and I'm like, oh my God, I got a blurb from Richard Adams. And they went, who? And I said, Watership Down. And they said, what? And they, oh, that creepy cartoon from the 70s. I'm like, well, technically, yes, but my God, there's so much more. And you don't know. So I don't know that non-author people here, I'm an author, has that much of a boost.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and I know, like, when I almost feel weird about when people say, what do you do for a living? And I go, I write stuff. Because when I've said to people, like, I write books, they're like, oh, you can make a career out of that? And I'm like, no, not really, but we try.
How much money do you make? How famous are you? Just have a book. Stop.
Yeah. I've got a book idea. Would you like to write about it? No, thank you, but thanks.
Seems like you with non-book people, you can either get indifference or almost worse is, oh, I've always wanted to write. It seems pretty easy. I have a book. Will you read it?
Yes.
No.
Yes. I get that as well. Yeah. I've got a really good book idea. Would you like to hear it? I have no power in publishing, so that would not work at all.
So one more question before we get here and we start talking about if you can read this, available now, esteemed audience. But I wanted to ask, as you go through all of this adversity, by God, finally, When Life Gives You Mangoes is coming out. It's about to be named Oprah Magazine's Best Caribbean Books for your 2021 reading list. And there you are, October in 2020, and the world shuts down. A whole pandemic. Like if there was no other adversity, if it hadn't been enough already, your big moment and the whole world shuts down. What's that like coming out in the middle of that?
Oh my goodness. You know what? When the world shut down, I thought, of course it does. Of course it does. My book's about to come out. I've been waiting for this my entire life, and the world said no. Not today. I just remember thinking, you know, how is this going to work? How are we going to get these people to hear about this book? Because a lot of things we had planned was to do events and go to bookshops and schools, and now we can't do any of that. And I know a lot of pandemic authors had the same problem where they struggled. We had to change the way we promoted things. Everything had to be online. And I just remember having to learn very quickly how Zoom works, to do Zoom, and to be pretty decent at social media, because that's where I would get the word out about my book. And I think, like, coming out on the other side, I almost became quite comfortable with that. It was very scary at the time, and I thought, this is not going to work. But then I got used to just doing everything by Zoom, and then the world opened up and my publisher's like, yeah, we can go out now and see people. And I was like, what? People in real life? No, thank you. This is great in my room. We'll stick to that. So yeah, we had to start, you know, going out and to bookshops and actually talking to people and doing it the way that we wanted to do. But yeah, it was a difficult year for us. And I don't think I got how bad it was. I think the publishers did, because they had experience of it. I didn't have experience. You know, this was my first time. I didn't know what we were really going into. I knew that we wouldn't be able to do face-to-face events, but I didn't know how bad it was. And I think, especially when the shops closed and bookstores closed, and so people couldn't buy books, we found that especially challenging. But it's done really well. I think it was just slower. You know, it took a longer time to get to people than it would have normally if the world was open.
I've done a few in-person events again now, and I'm warming back up to it. So, okay, I remember people. This isn't
yes.
don't get too close. Don't cough near me. But it is nice to see everyone again. And yet, anytime I do an event, a tremendous event, maybe 100 people, 200 people show up. Usually it's closer to about 30, 40, but still a nice event like that. And then I'll look at it like an episode of this show, and I'll see how many more people listened all over the world. And I think, well, what am I doing in person? That time maybe would have been better spent, make it available to everyone.
Yeah, because you can, I think that was the great thing about doing it online, is that we had much more access. We had access to a lot more people than we probably would have done if we were doing it in person. And because we were working with the US as well, we could sort of coordinate a lot of things that we were doing because it was all online. And I mean, apart from like being face-to-face with people and doing in-person events, I think it went fine for my introvert self. It worked totally perfect, and I was happy being in my room on a computer talking to people.
It's one of those great ironies of becoming an author is, hey, introvert person who likes to sit quietly and write things, come out here and talk to the world. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't you like to be up in front of people and speak?
I know. I'm like, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up for being in my room with the door closed and just writing by myself. This going out into the world and talking to people is, you know, like my biggest fear and has always been my fear. And when I worked for like charities, I used to avoid things like that. And now I can't. I have to. I have to do it because it's my book and that's how I'm going to promote it. So you have to get over it very quickly.
Well, somewhere out there is the Emily Bronte, the modern Emily Bronte, who's just writing everything and putting it in the trunk. And then the year after that person dies, that all of their stuff's going to be widely available. And maybe we'll have good thoughts about it. Maybe we'll criticize it. And she won't know. She'll be perfect.
You'll never know. That's perfect.
Well, I will tease esteemed audience because I have forehand knowledge that you have an actual haunted experience that you're going to share with us, but we're going to tease it for right now. We won't get into it yet because first we're going to talk about your wonderful book a little bit. If you can read this, available now. And true to my word, I will not make you sit through me fumbling through a summary of your novel. What does esteemed audience need to know about If You Can Read This?
Yeah, so If You Read This is about 12-year-old Bree. It's also set in Jamaica. 12-year-old Bree, she lost her mother 3 years previously on her 13th birthday, her 12th birthday, sorry. She receives 3 letters from her mom that her mom had written to her before she passed. She and her mom used to go on all these adventures for treasure hunt. And so her mom wrote these letters so they could go on one final treasure hunt together. So she follows the clues of these letters, which take her to a place that she and her mom used to share. And it's really just about Bree's journey in self-discovery, of accepting that things change, that her mom has left, and just finding joy with the people that are with her now. She also meets her grandfather, who's got dementia, and he was part of the memory of her mother and the happy memories with her mother. And so not only that has her memories with her mother changed, the memories with her grandfather have changed as well. And it's just her accepting that things change, people move on, and just accepting people or appreciating people when they're around before they go.
And I've just checked my notes. If you read this, not if you can't. I can't even get the title right. Who is the ideal reader for If You Read This?
So I would recommend it from age 9 upwards. It does deal with subject of death and dementia, but I hope I've been quite careful with the way that I've dealt with it, and as honest as I can for her age, and as gentle as I possibly can with that subject matter.
So what advice for folks who want to write about such subject matters, about grief, about dementia, about death, for how does that differ when you're writing for a middle grade audience versus if you were to write for adults?
I think that when you're writing for adults, you can be as unfiltered and as graphic as you can with that subject matter. I think that with middle grade readers, although I completely believe in being honest with children and their experiences, I think you have to tread very gently so that it doesn't frighten and scare them. So you have to be honest with them, but you've got to be, it's gentle with them as well. You have to hold their hand through the subject matter and also give them hope that things will get better. I think with adults, you can just say people die and you don't need to sort of, have a happy ending at the end of it. And I think children really deserve to see there's a positive ending to it.
And then I know that this is loosely inspired by your own experiences with your own impulsive mother and some of the diaries she kept. Is that right?
Yeah, it's mainly inspired by my grandfather, who had dementia. My mother, she used to be quite impulsive, and we used to go on a lot of little mini adventures. I remember one summer we were all really hot one night. We couldn't sleep, and she sort of came in the room and said, "Oh, you can't sleep either? Let's go to the seaside." We sort of just jumped in a car in our pajamas and a pillow, and she drove us to the seaside. We slept the whole way. When we woke up, we were at the beach. And my mom, loved doing things like that. But I also wanted to tell a story of my grandfather who had dementia. He was a fisherman, and he was well loved in his community. And it was because he was so well loved and so well known that when he started to get dementia, he was on his own, but people recognized him and called us. We were in England, called us to say, we found your grandfather and we don't think he's well. And it's because people knew him in the community why we got that call. And I didn't have much of a relationship with my grandfather until we put him in a home for people with dementia. And then we would visit him all the time. And it's probably the best relationship that I had with him, that lasted maybe 5 years. But I just got to see him completely differently from the stories that my mother would tell. So she'd tell me all these stories about him when she was a child. But I got to hear that from him. But he would think my mother was still a child herself, and that was part of his dementia. So he would talk about her as if she was like 8 or 10 or 15, and he would say, "Oh, she's got such a temper, she never listens to me." And he didn't know that she was sitting right next to him. And she would say, "Dad, I'm here." And he goes, I know. But then he would talk about her like she was a child. And I sort of got an insight to what my mom was like when she was younger, which I never had before. I'd have her stories, but here was her father telling me these stories as if they were now, as if they were happening in that moment. And he would also think he was still a fisherman, which he hadn't done for years. So he would say, "Oh, if I knew you were coming, I would have got you some fish." And often he would go missing from the home because he was trying to get to the sea to do fishing, to bring some fish back. So I just found it a really interesting and fascinating to watch him, because he seemed so alive when he told those stories, and when he didn't, he just seemed so lost. And I just found it quite fascinating to watch him and how he was stuck in this moment. And I just sort of wondered if he was stuck in those moments because those were the happiest moments for him, and that's all he remembered were these happy times, and that's what carried him through. So I took that story and I put it in If You Read This, in that, Bree's really looking for someone to comfort her. And where she found her comfort was with her grandfather, who had dementia, because he was stuck in the same place that she was, for different reasons. He was stuck in the past because that's all he could remember. And she was stuck in the past because she didn't want to forget.
Oh, I should point out as a footnote, just in case the esteemed audience thinks I made a judgment call. I've never met your mother. I took the word impulsive to describe her from things you've written elsewhere. How long does a book like, if you read this, not if you can, if you read this, how long does a book like that take you from inception to final draft?
This one took quite a while. We were still in a pandemic when I started writing this. It was part of a 2-book deal. I needed to write a second book. The world was on fire around us. I was finding it completely really hard to focus on a story. We had a few ideas that I went away, tried to write, it didn't work. And then I finally had this idea of, this young girl that has these letters that take her on an adventure. So I think from having that idea, sending it to my publishers and they agreeing with it, to it being published is a year and a half, I think a year and a half. Yeah.
That's incredibly speedy. So when you're because I know you're working on other projects almost simultaneously, you would have to be just given your release schedule. What does your average workday look like when you're not stopping to make time to talk with us?
So if I have a publishing deal or a deadline, I get up, I take the dog for a walk, and I use that moment to sort of clear my head and think about what I'm writing, where I'm going with it, the structure of it, any ideas I might have that I was stuck on the day before. And then I'll come back and I'll sit down, and if it's edits, then I'll start editing. If it's writing, then I'll just sit down and see where it takes me. And I sort of just sit down and write for as long as I can until my brain says, that's it, we're done. There's nothing more in the bank. And then I'll get up and I'll maybe get something to eat. I'll do something else. A lot of the times I sort of just watch a film to just completely just take my mind off it. And then I'll go back into it in the afternoon, and I'll do that a few times until I usually work quite late, till probably about 8 or 9 p.m. If I'm on deadline, I'll work later than that. But I don't always work every day, because sometimes I sit down to write and there's nothing there. My brain's not working. There's no ideas, no inspiration, nothing. And I used to, in those moments, really get stressed about it and try and force myself to do the work. And I will write something, but it will never be anything that I'm happy with. But I'm sort of learning now how I work. And when there's nothing happening, I just stop. I either do something completely different, or I get up, I go outside, take a break. Sometimes I just take the day off, and then I'll go back to it the next day. So no 2 days are the same.
So important for sometimes just to let it go, because otherwise you're sitting there and you're like, fall in love, darn you, do it.
Yeah, you're staring at the screen saying, write the words, where are the words?
I realize my day off has become a week. Okay, now what's going on? But a day or two here and there when you need to recharge, I think that's probably fine.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't know, maybe there's like 4 more novels you would have got, esteemed audience, if only I'd been more diligent. We'll never know.
Yes, you could have written a whole series if you hadn't taken that break.
You know what? It's quality, not quantity, hopefully. And some smart aleck's going to say, no, those books were terrible. Well, you could have deleted more terrible books. Well.
But they were books.
At least you got a nice podcast. I don't know what to tell you. So I'm watching our time. I know it's running away from us quickly, but what can you tell us about the new book, Adhoc and the Banished, which should be out here January 2023, or good news, esteemed audience, if you're listening to us after that, it's already available. Just go get it.
Yes, so Adhoc and the Banished is about a young girl who moves to a town that turns out to be magical. And the magical people are actually banished. And she's the only one. She finds out that she's the only one that can save them. So she moves into this small town, and she doesn't want to. She's always lived in a city. So she doesn't want to move. And her father finds her this paper round. And as she goes on this paper round, she finds something in the field which suggests something is going on in that town. And so she investigates and finds out that these people have been banished from society. And so she tries to find out why and what she can do to help them.
So that is either coming soon so you could be pre-ordering it, esteemed audience, or it's already available. Go get it.
Thank you.
Well, I promised esteemed audience, and I've tried never to break a promise to esteemed audience. They have waited patiently. I always ask every guest who comes on if they've seen a flying saucer and or a ghost. So have you seen either or both of those things?
It's so strange because I don't even think about this all the time. But every now and then I sort of remember this story and I'm like, oh, that was really weird. So years ago, my family lived in a different house in the same city that we live in now. And I was probably 17 because my mom had gone to Jamaica, but she'd left me because I was still in school, college that we call over here. And I was on my own in the house. My sister wasn't there and it was daytime. And I went into the kitchen. So we have this really long, narrow hallway that sort of is like an L shape. So you have the living room at the beginning of the bottom of the L, and then you go all the way down to the end, and that's where the kitchen is. So I went into the kitchen, and clear as day, I heard someone say, a woman's voice say, Kereen. And I spun around because I remember thinking, is my mom here? She's not even in the country. And I spun around and there was nobody there. And I literally, my heart was beating so fast. I was like, I 100% heard a woman's voice say my name right behind me. So I walked down the hallway looking to see who had called my name. And I was calling my sister's name as well, because she was the only other person that lived in the house with me at the time. But I knew that she'd left. And so I went to each room calling my sister, nobody answered. And I went into every room looking, there was nobody there. And I just remember sitting in the living room for about an hour going, that 100% just happened. I don't know what it was. I don't know who it was, but a woman's voice called my name, and now there's nobody in this house. And I was so scared. I actually didn't want to stay there for the rest of the day.
That would freak me out. I think that would freak most people out.
It was so clear as well. It was like they were right behind my head, like someone had just creeped into the kitchen without me hearing them and almost wanted to make me jump, which I did. I jumped out of my skin and spun around expecting to see somebody, and yeah, there was no one there. The place was empty.
So I'm assuming this is the seed of what's eventually going to be your first horror novel?
And that will be my new adult novel coming in 2025.
Flying saucers or no?
No, or maybe we.
Go on.
You mean if I actually seen anyone?
No, if you've seen them, or if you just have an opinion you want to offer, I'll take that too.
I've never seen a flying saucer. I've seen photos of them, and I don't know what I think about it. I believe there's something out there. I just don't know what it is, but I've never seen one with my own eyes. Have you?
No. I mean, some things in the sky that I didn't know what they were, but that's not exciting. I don't know. What is that big light? Could be. The most likely explanation is me misidentifying things and really hoping that I'm I'm seeing something amazing. But it's on my bucket list. The way things are going here, with the Pentagon having stated flat out that they've got classified or they've got recovered flying saucer material, I assume we're all going to see one at some point.
I know. I thought they said like a couple of years ago that they had these files that they were going to release. And I've been waiting for these files. I thought they were going to release it to the public, or did I hear that wrong? And I was waiting for these files to see what was in it, because apparently Obama said verified something or sort of hinted that there was strange things going on. So I was waiting. I actually had this conversation with my friend a few months back saying, did they release those files? And she said she didn't think they did. So be interesting.
Obama's been very good about making vague statements about, I know things, but I can't tell you. For whatever your opinion about Donald Trump, he did, on his way out, sign legislation that enacted the release of a lot of those documents. Now you go and you look at them and they're mostly redacted all through, but you read around the redactions and there's still enough interesting meat on those bones that go, really?
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, I 100% believe there's something out there. I just don't know what it is.
Well, hopefully they read books and it's a whole new market for us to reach out to.
We meet them one day and they said, I've read your book. We're like, I'm glad someone did. Thank you.
Huge on another planet you never knew existed.
Yes.
They want to arrange an author visit.
That's an offer I wasn't expecting.
Great. I'll get a whole new book out of this experience for sure. Kereen, this has been an absolute privilege and a pleasure. I really appreciate you making time for me and my audience. I've got one last question for you, and we'll call it a day. We'll end on this. But I like to end with the question, if you could go back toward the start of your career, middle of your career, yesterday, whenever it would have been useful to you, give yourself some advice that would have helped and made easier your path, that might make easier the paths of everyone who's watching or listening to us, what would you go back and tell yourself?
Oh, there's a few things I would tell myself. I think one of the things is, you've got to love the story that you write, because it goes through so many processes, and with editing, you edit it so many times yourself, and then you work with an editor and they edited it some more. And if you don't love your story, you'll end up absolutely hating it by the time the process is done. You've got to 100% love what you're writing. But also, I think what I would tell myself is just to enjoy it. Just enjoy every moment. Enjoy short story writing. Enjoy, every interaction that you have. Enjoy when you have a meeting, when you had your meeting with your agent, enjoy that. And I know it's so hard to say that when you have this idea of where you want to be and this goal, and you just want to get there. And sometimes you forget the journey. I think it's probably a better way to say it. You're so focused on the destination that you forget to enjoy the journey. And I think just enjoy it, because it's such a wonderful experience. You're doing what you love, you're coming up with all these ideas, and it's such a wonderful process when you sit and think about it. Like every now and then I'll sit and think, wow, I actually write and I create these worlds, and that's pretty decent. That's pretty good. And I think, just sort of enjoy the journey and not worry so deeply about the destination.
That is the perfect note to end on. Where can esteemed audience find you online, follow you on social media, and all that good stuff?
So on Twitter, I'm on there as Kereen Getten, and Instagram, I'm on there as @KeziWrites.
And as always, esteemed audience, for more information about me, and more importantly, for interviews almost as good as this one with other authors, editors, literary agents, all the world's best people, head to middlegradeninja.com. Download your free copy of Banneker Bones and the Giant Robot Bees. It will change your life. And God willing, I'm alive. I'll see you next week.